as a crime. What was particularly noteworthy, I might add, regarding the steps taken by the United Nations in the 1973 Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid was that it defined apartheid not as a crime limited to South African context, but as was stated at the time, the crime of apartheid, which shall include similar policies and practices of racial segregation and discrimination as practiced in Southern Africa. The plight of the Palestinian people is not limited to the actions taken in the occupied territories by the Israeli Defense Forces and other Israeli government agencies. While there are important distinctions to be made, the Palestinian citizens of Israel cannot be understood to be free and equal citizens of a country that denies them so many basic rights of citizenship. Rather, Palestinian citizens of Israel find themselves in a second-class status by comparison with those citizens officially recognized as being of Jewish background. In the realm of education, for instance, Israel has operated what is in effect a racially segregated state school system since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. A recent and outrageous example demonstrates the logical conclusion of such a system. Writer Jonathan Cook reported that an Arab couple suffered the humiliation of the expulsion of their one-year-old daughter from an Israeli daycare center because six other Israeli parents, six parents of the state-recognized Jewish background, complained that an Arab child was in the center. The course of action available to this couple is very limited due to the nature of Israeli law. Cook went on to point out that Israel spends approximately $1,100 on the education of each Israeli student who can demonstrate the requisite religious ethnic credentials to the Israeli state, compared with $190 for each Israeli student marked as Palestinian. With regard to land ownership, it was reported in the New York Times on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of Israel's independence, or for the Palestinians and much of the rest of the world, the Nakba, that Arabs occupy a tiny percentage of Israeli land, in fact, less than 7%, despite the fact that they make up 20% of the population. In every major category, whether land and education, health and employment, a racial or national ethnic differential exists between the officially recognized Jewish citizens versus the Arab citizens of Israel. In fact, according to that same New York Times article, Arab families, whether Christian, Muslim, or secular, are 3 times more likely to be below the poverty line than are officially recognized Jewish families. The Israeli system of apartheid also includes the disparity regarding the rights of people to enter Israel. The Israeli law of return allows any officially recognized Jewish person from anywhere in the world, regardless of whether that person has any actual tie to the State of Israel, to arrive in a country and receive immediate citizenship with all the rights and privileges that follow. Palestinians, who themselves were forcibly expelled from what is now Israel during the 47-48 war or later, are prohibited from returning to their home even if they still hold the key to their home, despite specific requirements of international law, including UN Resolution 194. It is important to acknowledge both the situation in Israel as well as the occupied territories in order to emphasize that the Israeli apartheid system is not limited to the occupied zones. The system of racial oppression or national ethnic oppression that is so evident in the occupied territories is directly related to the manner in which Palestinian citizens of Israel are both viewed and treated. On this International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, this cannot be forgotten or glossed over. While the experience in Israel for the refugees and within the occupied territories for the Palestinians is not identical, it does reflect the fundamental thinking of a racial settler state of Israel that Palestinians, much like African Americans in the United States of America, as described in an infamous court decision from the 19th century, do not have rights that Jewish Israelis are bound to respect. I was recently sent a copy of a letter that was written in April 1948 in direct response to the news of the massacre of the Arab residents of Deir Yassin by Jewish terrorists. The letter, written by a naturalized American citizen of Jewish background and sent to the executive director of an organization known as the American Friends of the Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, read in part, "When a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it the terrorist organizations build up from our own ranks. I am not willing to see anybody associated with those misled and criminal people. You will have to forgive the typos in the grammar. The author was not known to be a fluid writer. His greatness lay elsewhere. His name was Albert Einstein. It is worth quoting Einstein and calling attention to this letter on this day for several reasons. One, to remind us that terrorists condemned by Einstein later gained international legitimacy when the Israeli state was recognized, and many of these same terrorists achieved positions in the military and in government. Two, that Einstein, someone who had fled the persecution of the Nazis and who understood the full horror and implications of the Holocaust, was not prepared to use that historical reality to countenance the ethnic cleansing that was taking place in Palestine at the hands of individuals who claimed that they did not want the world to forget what had happened to the Jews. Three, Einstein recognized that there could be what he called a real and final catastrophe in Palestine. Though the catastrophe happened to the Palestinians in '48 and not to the Zionist colonizers, the failure of the Israeli state to repudiate its apartheid system and recognize the human rights of the Palestinian people has set in motion events that could lead to a massive catastrophe for the people of the Middle East. With an Israel armed with 100 to 200 nuclear weapons and an escalating arms race throughout the region, a catastrophe could be beyond what even Einstein would have contemplated in 1948. Einstein set an example that many members of the Congress of the United States and alleged supporters of Israel would benefit from both remembering and understanding. Common sense says that oppression, discrimination, and indeed genocide committed against one group never explains away or justifies crimes committed by that same group against another. The flaunting of international law through an occupation lasting more than 40 years, accompanied by clearly illegal colonial settlements, along with the institutionalization of a system of racial or national ethnic apartheid in order to guarantee that the subordinate group never exercises their human rights and instead disintegrates as a people into the dust of the Middle East, simply cannot be tolerated. Not only are the governments represented in these halls called upon to take action against such criminality, but people of conscience around the world, including within Israel, must and are taking a stand, whether through public statements in the mainstream media, petitions, resolutions, or through the boycotts, divestments, and sanctions to bring nonviolent pressure on the occupying power. The international desire for peace, equality, and justice for the Jewish Israelis and for the Palestinians, including Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, the refugees, and those under occupation, must move beyond conferences and fine words and materialize ultimately as actions that those who have perpetrated this oppression and who profit from the suppression of the Palestinian people will not only hear but will clearly understand. I again am honored to have been offered these moments to address this assembly, this committee, and thank you for recognizing that there is a civil society voice on the matter of justice for the Palestinian people, a voice that must be heard. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Bill Fletcher for his statement. Through you, Mr. Fletcher, I would also like to thank all civil society organizations active on the question of Palestine throughout the world for their work in support of and in